concerned about finding ways whereby a change can be brought about in a lawful way and manner, where under identical conditions, identical results would manifest. And so they found out that if he is not honest, completely honest within himself, it is next to impossible to enter into that realm which makes it possible that nature could unfold and show and reveal these laws which nature uses to bring about all that what we see. And so he had to free himself from creed, from dogmas, and whatever it was. So when he finally came to that conclusion that he in all sincerity could say that there is a superior intelligence, when he had one primary question that confronted him perhaps more than any of them, and in fact to this very day it hasn't changed, people still ask themselves this question: where do I come from? Why am I here? And where will I be hereafter? Now all this belongs to alchemy, because this is this evolutionary process.
The immortality of man is growing up in him in a mysterious substance. His bodies have a material immortality in the earth. His spirit has an immortality in heaven. And between these two is the soul, the bridge, the mysterious elixir of transformation, which we find in our daily living. I think it is well, therefore, to remember that even small, nice things, nicely done, are important.
Is a concept. It doesn't exist. As the proverb says, tomorrow never comes. There is no such thing as tomorrow. There never will be, because time is always now.
Welcome to the Philosophical Minds Podcast, the podcast about the stuff we wonder about.
And other things.
Right. Tonight I am joined with Nicholas J. Denton, a medicinal plant chemist, custom formulator, and organic spagyrist. Good existence, Nick. How are you today?
Grand existence. Excellent. How are you?
Pretty good. And for those listening, that's how Nick typically opens his bits. I really like that, so I figured I'd throw it out there, the good existence.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I know there needs to be something consistent every time.
I like it. So one of the main reasons I actually reached out to you is because I watched the way that you were beautifully describing like the importance of dual extractions, the order of operations in terms of solvents, or as you had said, solvents, and the dynamic kind of interplay occurring within the atomic bonds and how that all came into play. So if you could please dive into this and elaborate to any extent you wish, I would really love for you to describe the current understanding that you have arrived at with dual extraction processes and how you came to see everything from that point of view.
Sure. Certainly. So I really come from a background of basically what I consider just ignorance. Like I was one of these people in life who didn't like have any direction. I wasn't kind of identified as an agnostic, or just like didn't really have any beliefs, and because of where I was in life, didn't really like want to hold on to anything because it all kind of seemed very superficial. These spiritual traditions and churches and things like that I'm talking about. And so I didn't, and by the time I realized that, you know, there's kind of something going on in this world that's sort of magical and mystical about it, I needed to know about it. So obviously, like I identify, you know, try not to identify, you know, but identify as a truth seeker. And I feel like I've found at least some fraction of truth. And so now I'm a truth speaker. So that's why I'm always online talking, because I got to express like basically to, I assume, people that were just like me, who, didn't think there was anything going on and kind of lost without a way, and who needed to just like see that actually there is a truth out there. And so I feel like that's what I'm always talking to. And that's why when I make these videos, it's almost like I'm teaching. Like, I'm 27 years old, by no means like an actual teacher, but I know what I know, and I'm always just trying to give it to people freely, because in this day and age, like, scientific research isn't free. Like, you have to be in a school, you have to pay for research articles, and there's such, like, I mean, I just refer to it as an information war, or like the advent of truth into society is yet to become like a culturally sanctified thing. And so we're basically living underneath all these lies, and it's difficult to find out like what the truth is. And in terms of plant medicine and alchemy and like performing extractions, like, I always, before I was a plant chemist, I was applying to like University of Virginia and Virginia Tech to be a neuroscientist, because I was fascinated with magic, Enochian magic specifically. I wanted to know like what's going on in the brain with language, and further like the entheogenic experience, what's really happening in the psychedelic states. And on my path of truth seeking, like, I kind of considered myself on the path of knowledge, and that's just reading. It's reading and coming to understand intellectually through the mind. So yeah, I was just coming at it like completely blindsided and trying to learn everything on my own from the start. And by the time I get to like alchemy, it's after I've gone through literally what I felt like was everything. I wanted to go into the truth of the books. Now that we have all these books available online and the information, I like to refer to this time as we're in now sort of like what happened when people were first starting to learn how to read in the Protestant Reformation. And these people are reading the Bible for the first time and interpreting it on their own for the first time, and then finding out that the main church authority has been telling them the exact opposite things they need to do to get into heaven or find salvation or whatever it is. And then they reform it. And of course, in the heart of this Reformation, there's a lot of esotericism being propagated. I wanted to understand what was happening, like, with these prophets, with these messengers, with these people who supposedly contacted God at the end of the day. And like at the end of the day, it's they're alone, like in a cave, they're on a fast in a desert, they're asleep or like about to fall asleep, and they have spontaneous visions, starting hearing voices inside of their heads, fall into trance states and have these experiences, which are clearly internal, like mental phenomena. And so I wanted to just figure out, A, can you recreate that? And B, is it true? And see what's happening. And so the perspective that most of the ancients come with is there is a vitalist perspective, right? That the fundamental force of life is distinctly separate from physical phenomena. And so I am going into like chemistry and scientific inquiry, trying to hold on to that thought, because, well, I mean, it appears to be the truth. Consciousness appears to be non-local. Consciousness does not stop at the limits of the physical body. And when we look at these like stories or these mythos of these legends of what was happening, they're all talking about an environment or a reality that extends far beyond the physical limits. And so when we get with things like entheogens, and I'm always telling, like, the definition, we all know it means to generate God within. And it seems like so simple that you can just generate God within yourself through eating a plant. But what is the alchemy really in experiencing God? And if through plants, like, I'm always like careful to say, like, I don't necessarily think like plants are the way to go. Like, it's not the only way to realize God. It's a means to an end that you already have within yourself. And these things are just tools to catalyze. And so I was kind of realize, looking at that with mushrooms and with different psychedelics, and looking at them similar to the way Alexander Shulgin, who is a very famous chemist, I don't know if you're familiar with him or if the listeners may or may not be familiar with him. He was basically the chemist who invented hundreds upon hundreds of psychedelic analogs, like the 2CAs, 2CIs, and he like created synthetic cannabinoid compounds for pharmaceutical companies, and worked creating compounds to test on astronauts and all sorts of, like, he's a very excellent chemist, and he wrote this massive book, Phenylalanines I've Come to Know and Love, otherwise known as PCAL, and he describes like using therapeutic agents, psychedelic therapeutic agents to overcome trauma. And not only that, but not only overcome trauma, but to explore these different gateways in our minds, which lead us into these different like aspects of ourself, these different realities of ourself that we like with a trained mind and a trained consciousness can have direct access to. And these things are just, when people get on these things and you listen to the experiences they talk about, it is enlightening stuff. Like, the world is far larger than we believe, or than we are traditionally led on to believe that it is, and it's far more complex than anybody's willing to admit. And our ability to like be directly involved with the vastness of the universe, I personally believe, is like the next vista of human evolution. And it's, to me, it's like the plants, it's so simple to just eat some psychedelic mushrooms, or to go on an ayahuasca retreat and truly like gain the gnosis and realize that there's something within you and something beyond you and something beyond just this mundane day-to-day experience, and to suggest even that there might be something past death. And so like that's something, like we look back at some of the oldest medicinal practices, like the Tsar cult out of Africa, and we look at in the South America, and like what these guys are really doing with all these different medicinal practices is basically guiding souls into earth and away from earth. And Pythagoras taught the same thing, the transmigration of the soul, especially in the Tsar cult. Like, it's all about giving birth. And like I kind of wonder why there's so many herbs on the planet that are really good for labor and inducing labor, and for basically the divine feminine to encourage labor and to assist the birthing process. But the ancient people it was more than that. It was taking spirits out of the ether and then assigning them to the right bodies. And this whole bringing entities in was not just like, it wasn't as haphazard as it is nowadays, I guess you could say. But so especially further, these guys, a lot of my work is with one-irogenic medicine, which is lucid dreaming catalyzing, vivid dreaming catalyzing herbs, which I realize a lot of people aren't even aware is really a thing. But again, like when you go back and look at these ancient cultures, these people have been using this stuff for thousands of years. Like since the dawn of time, we've been using plant medicine to do incredible things. One of these plants, one of these one-irogens, I call them, I don't know if that's a legitimate name, that's a taxonomy I kind of invented. One-irology is the study of dreaming. And so one-irogen in my mind is a plant that catalyzes dreaming in any state. And so
I like it.
Thank you. I'm definitely not the only one to say that. I've seen other people say that before, but I don't know where it came from, but for clarity's sake. And these things are like tapping people into their ancestors and allowing them to communicate with spirits and intelligences, and they're gaining wisdom on how to make things and bring things back and heal and how to make other remedies. And so that's like, again, it almost seems so easy with these plants. And it's like you can take these substances and then have the experience and see whatever the kingdom is that you see, and then you come back, and then a lot of the time people are losing their motivation, they're losing the cream of the message. Like I talk a lot, I don't know if you've ever taken psychedelics, anybody else out there has ever taken psychedelics, but I'm sure everybody that has can relate to the fact that like when you are in a psychedelic state or a heightened state of consciousness, and then you come back to your normal mundane state of consciousness, not mundane, but beta alpha, watching TV and going to work every day, it's like you can't even recall what it was. Like, you know, you went through something, but to remember the truth of the experience and what it was really like you come back and there's always some force that just makes you forget. There's a forgetfulness, and that always bewilders me. Like, what is it in the mind that's actually making us forget? But it's like you can't remember what was going on in the actual trip and what the most important message of the whole thing was. It's you lose it. You can't come out of it. And it's because you're literally in a different reality frame. You cannot access it anymore. And so that's like a good thing, because it shows you that there's stuff there, but it's a bad thing because you lose it. And so my practice, like, I'm always trying to tell people that I'm just making like a pharmacopoeia teaches about how to use medicines and provides them. And so I'm trying to just provide things that assist the meditation process, which to me is just getting as relaxed as humanly possible, and then removing any obstacle which may inhibit that process. And a lot of people, for one, it's lack of interest. Like, they think, they just don't know the benefits of meditation or of self-exploration. I mean, there's great science out there that shows your telomeres will lengthen with mindful practices through meditation. Your aging, you will slow your aging, you will revitalize, you will release healing compounds within yourself that are beneficial. They're self-healing. We have the ability to self-regenerate, and we have the ability to improve our longevity and holistically, like, fix our mental health through just manipulating these things, these systems that are already within us, and like using these tools that are already a part of us, which I will definitely, like, I always want to tell people, like, the plants are not the answer. Like, you are the answer, and you have the ability, like, through the breath and mudras and just simple willpower and meditation, we can achieve these states of mind. But like, coming back to the plant medicine and how, like, why I'm researching how to make good mushroom medicine is because, like I said, there's mainly just a lot of lack of interest, and people don't really want to sit with themselves at the end of the day, because they've either got, like, the world's messed up, you know, people got messed up experiences, and people got trauma, and healing is a thing that is a reality that needs to be done. And like, just I think, like, this idea in the new age that we're remembering again what we are, I mean, it's kind of wishy-washy, but in a sense it's kind of true, because, you know, the whole goal of alchemy is to realize, and the whole goal of spirituality, minus, you know, the modern triad of the Abrahamic faith, is to basically realize your immortality, realize that you are God, and that you are one with God, and you are made in God's image, and God gave you capacities to create like a creator. But people, you know, people don't have that type of awareness. And it's like, again, it's like the age of the Protestant Reformation is replaying, when we've got all this information. And I'm always trying to tell this to people, like my family and stuff, because they don't read these books, and nobody reads esoterica anymore. But it's like, we now have the ability to look through every single holy text ever written on earth and search it with a fine-tooth comb, and like, just literally Command F, search a PDF, and like decrypt the entire thing. You can study that to your own heart's content, and nobody's going to kill you over it. And if you just do that enough with enough of these books, you like realize at the end of the day what they're all saying. They're all saying the same thing. And so, but people aren't doing that, right? People, the information more as people concerned with other things. And so I am at least trying to like communicate to people with me, like me, who have an open mind, but also people who are just, they're aware of like the human experience and its uniqueness, and perhaps even of their own divinity, but they're not aware of like that you have to like put in a practice, and you have to do something every day in order to elevate your own consciousness. It's not something that just happens. It happens after you put in the work, right? The great work. So, and so that ultimately like kind of crescendos into, let's just get people like healthy, like healthcare. The healthcare should not be called healthcare, in my opinion. It should be called basically a death care, or a, that might be a little far, but like healthcare and the Western healthcare system, in this symptom-based practice and this allopathic practices that are completely materialist based, have just been scientifically proven false through experimental research, like double slit experiments and just experiments into the nature of reality that have been occurring many times over. They're proving this empirical reductionist worldview to be basically an inverted or not complete worldview. And so how can we just get people to the point where they're able to sit with themselves, and like whatever is wrong with them, they can at least know that they have some sort of way to begin to heal that. Like, if, because a lot of these mushrooms, specifically mushrooms, are incredibly powerful for their anti-cancer, immune regulating qualities. And to be able to just have somebody like sit in peace is a powerful thing. And to be able to provide people the ability to heal, like whether it's an analgesic to reduce their pain, or to help fight off cancer, or to remove negative thought patterns from the mind, that's to me really the first step. Like that is the first step. And then once you're there, then you can move on into the more interesting things. But that's where really I kind of started to look at alchemy and realize, once I started to realize like what spagyria really was, and how powerful and advanced this medicine making practice was, I wanted to apply it obviously to mushrooms. And there's just no research there. I mean, coming from like human beings who are a part of nature, and like we've been extracting things from nature for a very long time and studying phytochemistry, and we have amassed such a great knowledge base as a human society. There are such little research in the way of mushroom medicine, active constituents, and extraction methods, that it's almost embarrassing. It's like, what is really going on here? And this like could lead into other questions, like the medical marijuana movement, because really my education was kind of set up because of that. But like, what really is going on in terms of legal making parts of nature illegal, and why is this information so occulted? And it draws right up into just basic natural medicine making. Like, I'm in school right now in this chemist program, and I'm trying to talk to these guys about the foundations of chemistry and Ayurveda and like the world's oldest written wisdoms, and they talk about plant medicine and how to use it and how it interplays with the spirit and the soul, and how like they have the answers to the hard problems, right? Like, modern science doesn't have the answer to the hard problem. What is consciousness? What is life? The binding problem. How does the body and the biology and the physiology tie together all the sense data to create an experience? Like, it's a complete mystery. And these chemists and these schools just look me square in the eyes, and they're like, Nick, we all know that's kind of bullshit, so we don't teach it in this program. And I'm like, well, what the F? Because first of all, the foundation of science and the foundation of chemistry specifically is like deeply indebted to these types of paradigms. They came right out of it, and how they evolved and why they evolved in the way they did, like who are the powers that be, and like what is the aims and the goals of the Royal Society and the people who, there is an authority on information, and there is an authority on interpretation specific as well in terms of like mystical events. And so basically I'm trying to figure out how to extract mushrooms and make good medicine so that we can be at peace with ourselves, and then begin to explore the other side of our minds and like really explore ourselves and come to know ourselves. And so like that kind of brings us towards like Mercury and Azoth and universal alkahest. And I think that is like a very, very intriguing inquiry with the alchemists that has been left out of consideration by modern chemists and scientists. And so just talking to these guys, they obviously they see a very material world, and Spagirists are trying to purify a spirit and a body and a soul, which is like in some cases different chemical constituents. It's not always essential oils. The soul is not always essential oils, and the soul is not always the essential oils of the plant. I work mainly with plants. I've yet to step into the mineral works and things like that, so I'm kind of operating from a limited perspective in terms of Spagyria. Like I am still learning every day, still learning how wrong I was and what to do. And so and more about the medicine making, because it's truly is an advanced form of medicine making. It is a top-down approach to the human condition, and it's because they, like I said, they had the answer to the hard problem, but it's like it disappeared. Like what was going on and who was in control and why did it end up like this? And to me, like, you go back and there are mystery schools and there are secret societies, and I've always been kind of like, I don't want to say a conspiracy theorist, but I take in all poles of perspective and listen. And like, whether you want to be conspiracy theorist or not, there are people out there that are willing to kill you and me for not agreeing with them. And that's just like a testament to the fact of like the state of the collective consciousness on the planet. And so it's like, I feel like we're really up against something that is like, we are in it so deep. And the fact that I can't find some basic medicinal mushroom information extraction guides is also a testament to that. And so, but I would look back in history, and like I said in a couple of my videos, we humans have been using just simple water decoctions and teas for the longest time. And it comes down to just really, what are we doing with the plant medicine? Because we can misappropriate it, or we can misuse it just like we can any tool. I'm definitely witnessing that in my degree program. Like I said, it's mainly set up to study cannabis, but apparently that's the only medicinal plant that the education system is preparing to look at, which is infuriating, because I didn't come here to study cannabis. I came here to study spagyrics and learn extractions better. And so especially in the mushrooms, I've just been trying to figure out like chemically how we can do this, and chemically like what an alkahest is. And they talk a lot about mercury in terms of grape spirit and a 100% proof mercury being just a solvent. I think I forget who said it's one of these other spagirists, or maybe it was Jean Dubois. Solvent, grape spirit is a solvent made by plants for plants. But if you use obviously 100 proof alcohol, your chemists are very aware of this. You're not going to get a full range. You're not going to get the totality of the soul with a 100 proof alcohol, simply because there are other molecules, like the way things dissolve into things. And there are solubility rates depending on the chemical constituency of different compounds. And so you simply can't use a 100% proof alcohol on something like a turkey tail and expect, or on something like a chaga, or on a many number of mushrooms, you cannot expect to get the full range of healing benefits from them. And you definitely have to do a dual extraction. And that's essentially making the tea first. Well, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of misinformation and confusion, and I'm just speaking my truth, So I figured after the chemical indoctrination, conditioning, and learning about chemistry and how atoms and things dissolve and mix together, which is an interesting, I can take, I have a lot of different thoughts. But when you go and look at the Corpus Hermeticum and about the nature of God and the creator, it's like the great dissolver. It's the one who can dissolve everything. And it goes at length saying this dissolves that. And if this can be dissolved by that, then it's impure, and that dissolves this. And it's like, okay, so, but I feel like the Hermeticum, it's beautiful. But further down the road, the Renaissance era alchemists, we really, and especially when you get to the time of lab alchemy, I feel like it just gets so overcomplicated because of the cryptography that goes on in comparison to the Neidan and the Weidan and the early Chinese alchemists. And it's just it gets so hard to figure out sometimes what the alchemists of the Renaissance are talking about. I just want to always go back basically to the Vedas, because that's where it originally comes from, and just make it simple and break it down. It's okay, the supreme self, they talk about the supreme self as a selfless self. It has no identity. It's beyond dual. Okay, and so that's what translates into alchemy to me as the alchemical marriage, the dissolving of boundary, the experience of oneness and connection with God. Because it's just we just get really lost. I personally get really lost in all these, I don't want to call it new age alchemy, because it's not at all, but alchemy goes back thousands of years. And this European alchemy, I guess we could call it, is it was the very last thing on my path for me to realize that that actually had some substance, and I needed to study and to break through it all. It's you can't do it as one man. You need all this network of people that is out there in the world that has been looking at and researching this stuff, like the Philosophers of Nature, and these groups on Facebook are phenomenal, and all these different resources to be able to make any sense of it. And now that we can, it seems so obvious to me, once you're able to put it all together, or once I was able to put it all together, what's going on. And so it's healing is beautiful, yes, but then I feel once you're healed, once you're done healing, everybody talks about healing. What comes after the healing? Now that you're healed, now we got to evolve. And that is where spagyrics comes in for me. And so spagyrics is very multifaceted in the fact that it's you can use it to on a physiological basis in beautiful ways. These mushrooms are so powerful, and a lot of this plant medicine too, they're powerful, and they're used clinically all over Europe, and they're just not studied here because people profit off of death in this country, and they seed drugs into inner cities and susceptible neighborhoods and feed all. It's negative. It's like a hellish realm. Like I said, Satan is the god of this world, and we live in the Kali Yuga. I don't know how accurate all these statements are, but love is not the king of this world, if you know what I'm saying. And so it's how do we really fix that? How can we change the world? Everybody knows you change the world, you change yourself. And so enlightenment and self-liberation is clearly the way. And I would never be saying this 5 years ago, but that now that I've done an essay of the world's histories and the world's metaphysical systems, it seems we are at this point in science where this point in our cultural worldview, at least here in America and perhaps in a lot of places in Europe, where we know that there needs to be a paradigm change. We know that we need to begin to see the world like we need to come to an agreement on what the higher intelligence really is and how to connect with it and how to use it and interact with it in our daily life. And to me, like there's no better way than plants. And so that's like why I started that's why I started with spagyrics, because I don't know exactly what point I realized like it's actually really potent. The chemical reactions in these things is not, it's not, they're not making shit up. Like it's powerful and it's therapeutic. And beyond that, you know, these compounds will literally open doors in our minds to other dimensions. And so how can we just like actually take what is happening when that happens to us and realize that like it's a part of reality and it's not just something that happens to us when we're, you know, overwhelmed and we want to like escape from, you know, having to think and work through our own shit on ourselves. It's more like the medicine is, it's a catalyst, it's a catalysis. It's never, I am always trying to tell people like, yeah, the medicine is a gateway, but it's like you use it unless you are suffering, your immune system is debilitated, you know, and you don't need it for the rest of your life, then by all means take it, see what you're capable of, and then prescribe yourself some sort of practice so that you can ascend and you can achieve that height again within your own mind. Because like that's, again, to me it's like you heal and then you evolve, and we need to liberate the world. And so I don't see any other like reason to be alive right now other than to try to manifest a more heavenly existence for myself and for others. And you know, so I could talk more about the chemical like the chemistry of the mushroom extractions, but really like why I started, what brought me to that point, like this is like just my response to the world, really. Spagyrics is my response to, you know, why are 40,000 children a week dying of hunger and preventable diseases? You know, why are we sending what 110.5 100 and sending a certain millions of dollars to Israel every week in a $38 billion deal? Like, why are we doing these things? And why the F don't we have like a realistic theory of life? You know, people are, we are lost. Like our society is crazy. We are really in it deep, but that is what I think kind of a beautiful thing, because the truth is so apparent and so evident, and it's so ready and ripe for the picking that like we just got to speak it and the world will change. You know, a lot of people like tell me like, Nick, you sound kind of smart when you talk about this stuff. I'm like, dude, I'm literally just saying the things that are obvious to me, and like speaking the truth in the time when everybody is scared to do it. That's like something that, I mean, people, I don't know what it is, but it's like it's easy. It's just people are scared of the truth. I don't know why.
Amen. From truth seeker to truth speaker, for sure.
Yeah.
You might be the king of all ranters in the best way. You would make an amazing
I'm a Gemini,
podcast.
So. What'd
yourself.
You say?
You would make a really amazing podcast yourself. I don't know if you've considered that, but that'd be pretty cool if you did.
Thank you. It means a
I
lot.
I love listening to you speak. And I think like I'm with you 100% with so much of what you said, like in terms of just having access to more information that we've ever had before, and being a productive human in this time where we're fortunate enough to be able to have access to all this information, all these old texts that contain all this knowledge. It would be insane for us not to try to dive into it and resurrect what truths we can extract from that knowledge. And the way that society's kind of set up, it's become so disconnected from, you know, like physical and mental homeostasis. And we're in such a rush, especially here in the West. Like everyone's trying to hustle and grind day to day. And I don't know. I do have hope
Wait.
though, and I think that for the masses, it's kind of starting with people becoming awake to big pharma or like censorship issues or like the banking system. And I think it's going to take a little while, but people are going to come around to kind of this medicinal knowledge in this kind of pure form and on both levels of physical and mental. And but
Yeah, I
there's a
agree.
couple things that you mentioned that I thought it'd be cool if you could elaborate on. One of them was you mentioned telomeres. I'm aware of what telomeres are. I wanted
Mhm.
to see if you could elaborate and explain for the audience, and then after that, I wanted to see if you could explain the telomeres real quick, and then I want to go back to the extraction methods because I didn't mean to derail you there because I wanted to get into the sort of interplay with like the spirits and the atomic level of the bonds between the atoms and all that, and get you to
Mhm.
think about that. But yeah,
So I'm no expert in genetics, but I'll give it my best shot. Your genes are basically wound together, and they have at the end of them these caps that they call telomeres, and it's basically like the I don't want to say the end of your DNA, but it's the end of a sequence. And these telomeres, they are known to shorten as your life goes on, and for a very long time, they didn't believe it was possible to lengthen them, and it wasn't even considered that lengthening them would be good for your physiology. It just wasn't a concern or a thought. They were just understood that as you aged, your telomeres began to degrade and shorten. And this is correlated with our aging. And so, health and physiology is completely surrounded by the ability for the body to self regenerate. And that, like, is a macro way of saying preserving your ability for your genes to recreate themselves. What material scientists are calling evolution is it's the random mutation of the genetic sequence in while it's recreating itself. And I lose the correct vernacular, but your DNA is always recreating itself, and it is always evolving by random mutations. Like, it's a random process, and the random mutations that survive the longest become the next species, the next evolution in that sequence. But specifically the telomeres, what they found out was that when they sent these astronauts into space, Mark Kelly and his twin Scott Kelly stayed on Earth, they noticed that the telomeres did lengthen, and that in a zero-G environment, they were not affected by aging and decay like they are here on Earth. And so that was some of the first evidence that suggested that your telomeres lengthening can contribute to your longevity. And further, there was a landmark study in Zen meditators where they showed that positive thinking and Zen meditation, which is control of your thoughts and practicing like open-heartedness and lovingness, like unconditional loving, opening your heart towards yourself and practicing control over your thoughts and even thoughtlessness, that in these instances, the telomeres also lengthened and they did not degrade as quickly. And so now we've got these $1 million gene therapies that are being given to elite circles and ultra rich people who are concerned with looking young for the rest of their life, and they're doing these gene editing that is just completely unnecessary. And it's strange to me because, again, it's like we have the research that says you can direct your physiology through the power of your thinking, whereas we aren't pursuing that type of healing. And so it's just like sort of a biofeedback. Like I was saying earlier, reductionism and materialism, like the force of life is distinctly separate from physical reality. So genetics, in my mind, and this isn't, I don't know if there's proof or, there's a lot of words out that are spoken, but I believe that the body serves more like an antenna for the force of life rather than a generator or producer of. And so when I'm talking about lengthening telomeres, it's really just about preserving the DNA and creating the right environment for it to recreate itself without error. And then further, for us to be able to come into a mental control and begin to, instead of randomly mutating our DNA, controlling the evolution of ourselves and building our DNA with our thoughts, with our intentions, and by manipulating the environment around us. And then the telomeres just, you can get these tests done and it's just a biofeedback in my mind, because geneticists will have you say, well, there's so much that can be just in your genetics. It's like you are this way and you think this way because it's in your genetics, but like it's not that simple, because where the consciousness and the body interacts has truly never been pinpointed. And so I tend to use physiological systems more as a biofeedback system rather than this is the causation of your experience. Instead of saying this is the original cause of what's happening to you, we are more so capable of driving our own evolution, and our own ascension through, we're able to control our own biology, which is a reflection of ascension, which is a reflection of evolution. We're able to control our own biology through applying mental effort. And so the telomeres, the fact that we can do that, the research is there. It's the belief that people have in their willpower to actually do it that is lacking, I find. And so I'm just trying to bring the proof, the research to the light, and then, hopefully some people will taste the pudding.
Beautiful description. All right, let's get into some of the dual extraction chemistry.
Yeah,
if you would be willing to do that.
Certainly. So we know that, like, in alchemy, in the spirit and the body and the soul, like the soul are volatile compounds and that the salt is fixed compounds. And what we talk about is volatile, like compounds with an S on it. It really complicates things, because every single time you touch something, there's chemical reactions. Second you chop down a plant, it begins dying and losing precious chemical compounds. Second you start distilling it or extracting it into maceration, nothing is perfect, right? Like, we are obsessed kind of with a perfect universal solvent, but the truth is, in my mind, is that, I don't want to say anything too outrageous, but the idea of perfection is an illusion. Everything simply is, but we have to figure out a way to essentially create a perfect extraction. And to me, like a perfect spagyric extraction, or even you could say like a philosopher's stone, is a purification of the spirit and the body and the soul to a point that it can be reintegrated, and that the separation can no longer be differentiated. It's now one substance called a homogeneous solution. And but like they say that the spirit it houses, the spirit has to be present in order for the soul and the body to be recombined, in order for the bonds between the alcohol, the oils, the sol, the active constituents of the plant, and the salt, in order for that to be bound together, it needs to be in the presence of an alcohol. And this can be, that's easily achieved, right? We make spagyrics all the time and we recombine the principles. But the problem comes in mushrooms when, in chemistry, they have basically taken every single compound and figured out at what point it can solubilize, meaning at what point it can dissolve into a liquid and at what rate. And it depends on a lot of different factors. But basically what we find is that there are all of chemistry is basically on a scale of pH, or acidity and basicity. And some compounds are much more basic, some are somewhat neutral, and some are very acidic. And you simply cannot physically extract an acidic compound with a basic substance. And that goes for alcohol. Alcohol is a slightly basic substance, and there are compounds which are volatile, which are terpenoids and polyphenols and alkaloids, all sorts of compounds which you simply cannot dissolve into alcohol because of where they stand basically in terms of electronegativity. Electronegativity was created as an idea thought up by this guy in the 30s about the energy that holds atoms together. And it's essentially, electronegativity is exactly what it sounds like. It's an electrical force. And it's the power of this electrical force, which could be basically, you can put a number on it. They call it a dipole moment. And it's a measurement of the polarity of a molecule. And so hypothetically, water is a dipole moment of 1. You can't use water, which is a 1, to extract something that is a 0.1, right? You can, but what you'll find is that you won't get a clear solution. You'll get precipitate and salts forming in your solution, which means that it's not a solution. It's differentiated into parts. It's not holistic. It's not spagyric. And so the question becomes, like, how can we prevent the precipitate from forming? Or not only that, but what is the solvent that we have to use in order to be able to retain compounds from both ends of the spectrum in your final medicine? And so, like with mushrooms, a lot of those are denatured by alcohol. Alcohol has an effect on the cellular membrane in which it basically destroys it, and it renders what is inside of the cell, other bioavailable compounds, to be dissolved into the ethanol that are within its range of solubility. And so you can do that, but like, where in the mushroom is, or where in the cells of the mushroom are the medicinal compounds? They're everywhere. And like I said in a recent video, it's like, your body isn't like looking specifically for polysaccharides. It's not looking specifically for like the exact thing that it needs to assimilate and incorporate into its homeostasis network. It can kind of take things apart and doesn't care like what it's called, right? Like a polysaccharide is a chain of carbons and hydrogens in a certain combination or permutation, and the body has somewhat of an ability to break these things down and synthesize its own compounds. That's constantly what is happening when we're eating and we're drinking. And so how do we retain, or how are we able to get the full spectrum is like the only question. And you can't ask a chemist this question because they're going to say, well, what compound do you want? What specific compound do you want? And I'm like, that's not a question we can answer, because we know that in mushrooms, like I said, 2 different ends of the spectrum, same mushroom. And so I'm really trying to figure out, I'm like kind of coming at it from a chemical analyst perspective, right? Like, I'm trying to figure out the relationship between percent hydrogen and the dipole moment on molecules, because they both classify as acidic, right? To give a brief understanding of the universe in terms of organic chemistry, it's like everything is carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen, mostly carbon and hydrogen, and of those two, mostly hydrogen. And so they talk a lot about pH because hydrogen is one of the most abundant elements in our world and in our physiology. And hydrogen can be electrically charged. In other words, its basicity can be increased, its alkalinity of a solution can be increased, and that is saying the same thing as like taking another compound that is basic, that it might not have any hydrogens on it, but it's still very basic and it's still an alkaline compound. And so there's a relationship between percent hydrogen, or pH, and acidity. Like that, we know that like something with low pH, we call it acidic, but we can just have compounds that don't have any hydrogens and are acidic because they're just seeking electrical charge from things. It's really electronegativity and the attraction between atoms. It's all electrical. It's an electromagnetic phenomena, and I say it's based on the vacuum of space, but it's so simple once you break it all down, because a helium atom, right, is the second element in the periodic table and is literally the same thing as a hydrogen atom, but duplicated, right? Like the proton and the neutron of a hydrogen is the same proton and neutron that's in a helium, but it's twice the number of them. And so what we're looking at is a refraction and a multiplication of one substance over and over and over again to create the periodic table of elements. And so it kind of becomes a little bit tricky because, like I was talking about, the nature of percent hydrogen, pH, and simply basic and acidic compounds that don't have, they don't need to have hydrogens. It's really about the electrical charge in them. And so you can kind of sum that up by saying that mushrooms, plants, minerals have an electrical affinity in them. And the law in chemistry is that like dissolves like. So if you have a highly acidic compound, you need a highly acidic solvent in order to solubilize it, right? And so ethanol and water, one is like we call water a 1, and ethanol, I forget exactly, it could be like a 0.6 or something, or 0.7. It's slightly less than water. And so in order to get all the compounds, we can't just use ethanol, we can't just use water. We want the full range of compounds, because even in material science, there's a great deal of research done on the synergy between multiple active medicinal complexes in plants. Like, you get more healing potential when you have more medicinal compounds available to your nervous system. And it's just like, it's the same thing. Like, I'm at the school, they're studying marijuana, and everybody freaking out over the delta 8 cannabinoid and THC, the one that gets you really high. But there's over 200 compounds in the whole plant, over 200 cannabinoids in the whole plant, and in the roots and in the stems, and they're completely neglected. And if you go to get a test done on cannabinoids, there's only 12 different cannabinoids that they're testing for, but the medicinal therapeutic action is exacerbated when you have the whole range of them in there. And so we've got these isolate seeking extraction methods out there. Like, we have a bunch of them specifically for cannabis, but nothing for mushrooms. And so I had a simple question, which one first, water or alcohol, and why? Because it does matter. Like, every step in a chemical experiment, if you mess it up, you can't go back, and you can't know without testing it. And so the question is really how to retain them all. And it is a difficult question. I do think we need to look at our solvents. And I think that there might be something like water is a neutral compound, but it can extract both polar and non-polar compounds depending on its percent hydrogen, right? Depending on the acidity of the water, which people don't realize. Like, we are aware of the phenomenon of alkaline water being sold in stores, but you can take water pH way down to 2.5, even lower. You can take it way low, and it's a totally different substance. Like, what we're calling water, people just say the word water. They're kind of ignorant as to what is really in water and what it's really doing inside of us. And so my question, yeah, was just water or alcohol first. And what I found was that the most of what the novel compounds in mushrooms are these very, very light, very large membrane bound proteins and compounds. I think in my video I said membrane bound organelles. That's not actually right. It's a membrane bound protein. So it's just something that's built into the membrane of these cells. And that's the cell wall is like just what protects the internal components of the cell from the environment. But that is also where the membrane is where these highly medicinal compounds are, that the immunoregulators, the immunomodulators. And if we're using alcohol first in a dual extraction, we denature all those compounds by destroying the cell wall. And then that forms into our spagyric or tincture or what have you as a precipitate, as a salt, which you can collect and take, but ideally you don't want to take that because it's just not as powerful. It's not as bioavailable. It's not in the bioactive state that it could really be in. A bioactive state is an aqueous solution in my mind. I haven't really, I don't know if that can be, I don't know who else would agree with me in that statement, but an aqueous solution is something in which all the particles are dissolved perfectly. So, and then in the mushroom extraction, you have to, everybody does the dual extraction for good purpose, because there are, even though the polysaccharides and these membrane bound proteins and therapeutic agents are incredibly important, so are the ones that are inside of it. And so that's where the alcohol comes in. You have to do the water first because it's a less violent extraction, you could say, right? Just making a tea out of it is less harmful to the chemical constituency, to the subtler compounds, the more volatile, that are readily denatured by minor heat or temperature adjustments or solvents, which may be slightly too acidic or slightly too basic. And so water is a really powerful kind of buffer solution that you can use to get very powerful medicines from. And it's just like if you're somebody that's like sick and needs to use it, regular usage of these things, it's not anything like Western medicine where you take it and you feel it immediately. It's like you build up, you're rebuilding your body back into, we've fallen, right? And we are rebuilding the temple, which is our human body, to be in its most pristine functional shape, because that leads to higher states of awareness. And so, like, really, yeah, the chemistry of the mushrooms is really interesting, but it's like at the end of the day, you have to recombine the two. You don't have to, but if you want a spagyric, a highly evolved version of the plant, you need to unify the entire thing into its spagyric form, into its evolved form. And it's a unification that's kind of difficult between water and alcohol. And so it's a very, like, I might have to write a book on this after I do a bunch of research, because all these mushrooms are so different. I think lion's mane, there are like 0 alcohol soluble compounds that are all water soluble. And each one is unique. And so somebody has to go in and look at these plants and look at the compounds and figure out the ratios of alcohol to water that retains the most amount of therapeutic compounds from it, most amount of bioavailable constituents, because nobody's done it. There's no books out there. Like, Paul Stamets is doing great stuff, but like in terms of a natural medicine system which is easy to understand for everybody and to apply in their own lives and to make their own medicine and like be self-sustaining, like as humans should be. Like spagyria is definitely that medicine practice that allows you to do that. And like I'm trying to definitely advance it in terms of these more exotic mushrooms and stuff, but figuring out like how to do that, it is a task. And like there are simple questions that need to be answered that there's just a lot of confusion around. So I'm just trying to get some black and white. Why? You know, why do we do these things in certain ways? And everybody has an ideal on the dual extraction. So I just took it and I took it apart I needed to know. Like I took apart the religious experience and the whole, like what are the world's holy texts. I did the same thing on the mushrooms and went in and, you know, figured out actually there's not really a lot of information. People do need to kind of put in some research and figure out the right extraction methods, because the blueprint is there between spagyrics and creating good plant medicine, but how to get the soul out. Like it's not always a steam distillation that's going to do the job, you know.